My friends, if I could have your attention, would like to get started because our guest lecturer today has no shortage of words I've found so far. I'm really just here to introduce the introducer. Thanks for coming. Again, if you were a first or second year student, your attendance is required. You've been logged in. If you haven't, see one of our scanners before or after. Thank you for coming. I see there's some other members of the community here as well. This is going to be fun. I will now introduce William Dean, also a licensed architect, to introduce our lecturer today.
When I was a student at the University of Buffalo, I got to meet a number of, I guess they didn't call themselves star architects back then so much. Faye, and these names will probably escape most of you. You can look them up later though. Faye Jones, Charles Moore, more recently Diller and Scafidio, Kenneth Frampton, some of the heavy hitters, and I got a lot out of that. So when we, when I was working with the last year and Dave this year, we want to make sure we're exposing you to a wide range of different types of practitioners. So, and we saw a couple weeks ago with Jason Streb, each kind of focusing on different aspects of practice, but really wanted to kind of treat you to a well-recognized, award-winning designer this evening. And I've known of him for a long time. You all will never know the joy of belonging to a book club, I'm sure. This was before Amazon. You used to get a thing in the mail, and you could send away for books. And one of the first books I sent away for was called The Small House: An Artful Guide to Affordable Residential Design. 1986. So when we think of tiny houses and all the different TV shows associated with that, all the rage now, this guy's been doing that since way back when. And it's a wonderful book. You haven't changed a bit by the photograph.
It's sad.
He was nice. Duo was nice enough just to sign the book for me, on top of where one of my kids signed it. I don't know where you can see that. But anyway, I had a chance to meet him in Sorrento this past year. We spent a lot of time together. He spent some time with our students, and he was just so wonderful and caring. And on top of that, he offered to come here and speak with you this semester, and I had to take him up on it. So with no further ado, I'll introduce Duo Dickinson.
Two things, I gotta do this. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Is it good? And then the second thing is, I have a wife back home, and she won't believe this many people. So when I actually do this, you've all got to say, I think the thing would be fromage. Say fromage. Fromage. There we are. So this is a talk that I've given in not this talk, but this is probably the 6th or 7th in a row over the last year and a half. And it's been to Seattle, it's been to Vermont, it's been to DC. It is basically a talk that's started with an insight that I had that's really not part of this, but leveraged it. And I'm going to start with an insight that I want you to think about for the rest of your careers. Right now, all of you, 100% of you, all of you deal every day with gravity, right? Gravity. Gravity is gravity. We'd be underground, we'd be dead. Without defeating gravity above us, architecture really wouldn't exist. The one thing that we are missing in all of our perspectives, mine included, is history. And history is, to me, as important as gravity. And that's why I want to give to Bill my 8th book, and it's about history. Thank you. So with that, let's think about why you're architects. You're all in your 20s, some of you are in teens. So just think about this. Why do I want to do what I do? Why are we doing this? why do we build? Well, I'm 64 years old. I graduated in 1978. I've practiced for 40 years. I've been licensed for 36 years. I've had my own firm for 32 years. And I can tell you, driving here, seeing the verdant hills of central New York, I felt that the tinge of color in their leaves is your future. Because we, all of us, have lived the last several generations in architecture in one forest, and it's been green. That forest is changing. The tinge is there. If you've been doing it for a while, you see that the age of the computer, the age of xerography or actual printing as opposed to ozolid and blueprinting, that change is minor. The computer is minor compared to the advent of what artificial intelligence will do to every single thing you are doing. And because of that, it seems to me that I wanted to talk to you about two things that shocked me, depressed me, but also were the biggest buzzkills, I think, in the history of architecture, and they happen within 6 weeks of each other. The first is pretty simple. The first is these buildings here. These buildings here are Hudson Yards in New York. The $20 billion, and they were based not on design, they were based on making money. And because they were making money for their clients, making big money for their clients, they forgot about the larger issues of context, aesthetics, anything really, except money. Except they beggared the question of Rockefeller Center, equally as large for its time, equally as prominent, equally as important, but it actually made a place. It actually made a dominant void. We're doing a building together. Turner Brooks does a whole section of his first year course about at Yale on the dominant void. Instead, there's that. It's almost like a remnant, like a leftover, an apology of art amid stacks of cash. The second thing that shocked me, that said, is that really what architecture is? The second thing that shocked me was not actually Notre Dame burning. That was horrific and terrible and bad. The second thing that shocked me and fulfilled what I think is a horrific outing of the way most people have come to think about us outside of our profession was the response. That we could actually be like the ambulance-chasing doctor and go to a tragedy and try to make a buck or a name. Or we could try to save the world and be a starchitect and take the end of something or the transition of something or even the thread of something that's literally sacred and turn it into some sort of professional benefit. And the outcry from all of my friends and compatriots who are not architects was unified. Why would you guys do that? It burned like 3 days ago, and you're giving me this? Can you just relax and let the thing settle out? No. About 100, 200 architects made stuff happen, a book's going to come out, and our reputation has changed. Well, concomitant with those things, happening at the same time, has been this drumbeat that started around the same time I was thinking about the elements of this course. The fact that gravity is the same thing as history, but goes unrecognized. Several people said, what about this thing, beauty? What is beauty? What? Beauty, and all the people that have been around for a while will tell you this. If you use the word beauty in your presentation, or beautiful, you got an F. Beauty was the least relevant design criteria of anybody in architecture school for the last 80 years. The number one criteria was innovation, cutting edge, examination of the motivations and the realities of our culture. Last 5 years, 3 years, people have been saying, what is beauty? Well, Richard Crum out of Yale writes this book. that says, back in the day, Darwin really had this theory which has been discredited and was not even talked about until he did it about 5 years ago, which was there was so much unnecessary elaboration of the animals that were studied that their beauty had nothing to do with procreation, of maintaining the species, had nothing to do with any valid thing that came after it. And an article in the New York Times took that kind of esoteric thing and it made it highly public. And I just want you to read this. This is talking about the fact that that beauty is really not just a feeling. It's essentially about the dialogue between the perceiver, you, and what you are perceiving. And he says, and it's really about the audacity of a flower. The fact that a flower is designed by no one, and a flower is exquisitely complicated, and a flower is exquisitely simple, and it has enormous power for reasons that are completely unknowable to anyone except you go, wow, that's really beautiful. Why is that? So a lot of people are thinking about this. 2 weeks ago, Zamir Zeki basically said, is a neurologist, neuroaesthetic guy, and he basically said that it's hardwired into our brains. It's hardwired, this idea. And 2 years ago, I wrote this piece not using the word beauty in any regard except I had completely messed up in something in this house, aesthetically, and I retrieved it, and by retrieving something I had made a mistake on, I realized there are things that I can't figure out. There are things I have to just understand. I can rationalize anything, but I can also not deny the beauty or the lack of beauty of anything. And this has been happening. This is out this 2 weeks ago by a great architect named Mark Allen Hewitt, and basically making this connection between how we think and what we make. How we think and what we make. How we think and what we perceive, and what we perceive, how we feel. Making this declension. And there's some pseudoscience, and there's some overblown hype, and there's some buzzwordy stuff. But an architect out of Colorado, Don Ruggles, basically is leading this idea of trying to have architects understand that what they're doing has implications beyond simple modern, traditional, colonial, whatever you want to call it, no stylistic meaning whatsoever. The fact that there are 90% of our impulses are completely unknown and are happening all the time, and our brains are so complicated that we really can't understand why we think a flower is beautiful. And he wrote a book about it, and it's a darn good book, and you should actually get it. It's a very interesting book, and in the book, he says there are 2 ways of thinking about beauty, and this is all done with science and all the rest. He said really it's top down. It's thinking about beauty. It's top down, where you take care of all of the business, of all the things you are doing, the design, the ethics, the team management, fiduciary law, the historic style patterns of history that are embedded in all of us in school. And maybe, if these all fit together, maybe the result is beauty. He says that's one way of doing it. That is top down. Or you could do it bottom up, where you see from the outside beauty, and you actually are curious, you're anticipating what's going on, you have a pleasure response, and then if you just read this, a continuous loop, that the curiosity, the pleasure, the actual reinforcing of the quest for more beauty is actually from the bottom up. It is the feeling of it, the incoherent feeling of it. Now, I'm sure half of the people in this room, were saying, well, obviously, this is the better way, or the other is the better way. What he says, and it is true, is that both of us, all of us, think both ways. All the time. We can't control it, we can't direct it, we know it. No matter what you learn is correct in school, you know it is correct. So if we know it is correct, we know something works for us or does not, and the world is literally at the edge of a precipice of having our creation, artificial intelligence, what we actually made, humans made this thing. We are on the verge of having those things we make tell us what we feel. Now think of that for a second. The things we make will be telling us what we feel. Not how we should feel, what we feel. That change, where computers, or whatever they are, the chips, the somethings, will be able to show somebody what a building could be, independent of any one of you, or me, or any other human being. They can process through what buildings could be from all the buildings that have ever been made in the database of artificial intelligence, have made it, will make it so completely user-friendly that the ability to create a building will mean that buildings like this, very simple, odd thing, which I saw on the internet 3 days ago, that robots made this building. I think it's Switzerland or somewhere. And basically, I went, yeah. That's what some people are desperately afraid of. And I'm hoping to give this lecture, and I've been invited, at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is a group of incredibly smart, wonderful students and practitioners that are doing really interesting things with classical architecture. Behind them are a group of humans who are terrified of modernism. And they're as terrified of modernism as, to be honest, modernists are of kids coming out of Notre Dame. It's one of these things where back in the early 19th century, a fabled person named Luddy was so upset about the Industrial Revolution that an actual movement happened, which was a real movement. The person might have been anecdotal, but the movement happened, and they would smash printing presses, smash cotton gins, smash the machines, because the loss of the humanity of making things made it outrageous and horrible, and it was going to destroy our civilization. Well, that transitions into the way architecture is. There's one dominant paradigm, we all know it, it's modernism. It's been that way for 80 years. So last month in Architect Magazine, they celebrate two really nice projects. Individual homes, probably made pro bono by the architect for homeless people or for people of very modest means. Not Habitat for Humanity, but just really nice small homes, really beautiful. Well, for the last 30 years, I've designed 100 homes for free for the people having their first home in Habitat for Humanity. Has any one of those been published? No. Will any of them ever be published? No. These will be published because they're modern. They're a modern building. And that dominant paradigm has now hit the wall of the Luddite resistance to essentially the looming artificial intelligence, but even more, so that now there's a group, the International Classical Society, I gave a talk to them about 2 years ago. They want this society with millions of dollars of promotion and zero chance of success. They were on PBS 2 weeks ago for a 15-minute interview, basically saying they're going to rehabilitate the horrific Penn Station. Now, you've all been to Penn Station, it's one of the worst buildings ever made by anybody ever. But we should not repair that building. We should remove it completely, and we should rebuild the Kid Mead and White's early 20th century Penn Station exactly the way it was. Because that's the way it was. They would smash the printing press. They literally want to remake what is there. Unlike at Notre Dame, where they invent new things every day, just using a different way of doing it. These people want to make the exact same building. Well, it's not just these people. It's a lot of people. Back in June, Witold Rybczynski, one of the great architectural writers of all time, wrote a 4 or 5 page review of this book by James Stephen Curl. And this book basically says modernism is the end of civilization. There's never been a good modernist building ever made. When they tried to make modernist buildings out of prefabricated parts, they collapsed. When they made these housing projects, they were torn down within 20 years of them making them. Modernism is the fruit of a corrupt soul of our culture. It is a radical hatred of the modern movement. To the point where people are writing. This is a great blog, by the way. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's called Failed Architecture, FA. It's a great blog. And two people write this thing where they show that the political conservatives have actually, all over the world, doesn't matter if it's America or Britain or anywhere else, have basically equated modern architecture with the end of civilization. And therefore, a good conservative hates modern architecture and loves traditional architecture. And even in Current Affairs magazine, that's 2 years ago, but still, people in Current Events magazine, they actually talked about why people hate contemporary architecture. It's the civilian word for modern, obviously. I picked up on these things and I wrote a piece after the election. And I basically said, is architecture as fractured as our politics? And when you think about it, the vast majority of all of us will go out into the world and we will not make modern masterpieces. We'll make interesting buildings or renovations or whatever that deal with contexts, are clever and interesting. Some might be modern, some might be hyper-traditional, some might be just whatever the heck they are. They don't really have a style. They're just you or the client or the context or whatever. Well, I was equating that to the fact that that's probably all those red guys. The super high modernists, the ones that are awarded, the ones that have magazines, the ones that are lauded, the ones that are everywhere you see, control us in these tiny pockets of blue. That rejection that was true in the election, rejection of the known paradigm, that's what I know is coming in architecture, not on stylistic grounds at all, or political grounds at all. What's going to happen is that when the technology changes the entire civilization, we are going to change. Well, having said that, I get a call from Steve Mouzon saying, hey, could you submit something? Could you submit something to this competition? I even had to write it down because I forgot it was the new Urban Guild competition. I said, sure. I just finished this thing, and we just sent them to join this thing. We took 12 years to make, and you can see it's kind of maybe traditional or normative or something, but you know it's fun and interesting. It's got some neat stuff and all the rest, and you know incredibly successful. Thousands of people are there. It's one of the best things I'll ever do, and didn't get a dime doing it. It's a wonderful thing, and it was just too modern to win. So into this controversy, right? Into this controversy, this 21st century is happening. And what's happening to our profession? What we're all signed into, what I devoted my entire life to, 40 years. What are we signing into? Well, it's not good right now. Right? I mean, the NCAR, the National Council of Architectural Review Boards, right? Anyway, they're trying hard to make sure licensing will protect our value. Your generation, fewest number of graduates getting licensed. Longest time to get licensed. The benefits of licensure are unknown, really. It's hard to know. So I write another piece. I write a piece about this, the fact that everything is changing except the deep state of architecture. AIA, I'm a fellow of the AIA. The AIA isn't changing. The journalism is not changing. The blogs are changing, but not the magazines, not a lot of the schools. You won't hear this lecture at Yale, and I teach at Yale sometimes. You won't hear this teach because this is not something people want to deal with. We keep speaking words and language and sentence structures and syntax that people don't understand, and therefore we think it has value. We actually 20-some years ago had this cover because the nature of the profession was losing its relevance to people. And last week this comes out. After a rebound from the recession, 4 or 5 years of increased design fees, they crash. Why did they crash? Well, I think it's because the technology is making fees get incredibly competitive. Fees are reducing for the same or more work, so the dollars for fees is going down. That means that there are fewer jobs for you, fewer jobs for me. There's fewer things going on, and so when somebody calls me and says, would you like to design a building for this school? I go, well, all right, I'll at least draw you a sketch. He asked 20 people, because it's the internet, 20 architects, 20 known architects, not any architects, known architects. 12 of us say, okay. And I do a pretty cool thing. I do this thing where in this campus, this new campus he has lots of sculpture. I make kind of a sculpture out of a building, and I show how you could do it for $225 a square foot using prefabricated trusses and big steel columns, and I've done this before in other buildings, SIPS panels, and even get some free birds' nests, all that good stuff. It was great. He said, I really like that, but I need to see more. I said, look, I've given you $5,000 worth of free service. I mean, I really need to see more. And I said, really? He says, look, you're one of three. You're one of three. Give me more. So I gave him some more, and I built him a really good model. And of course, somebody else got the job. Because as things get that competitive, you lose money and you make less money. So you see, I see this last week. You want an easy life, don't become an architect, says Zaha Hadid. Unbeknownst to this is, one of my first interns was one of her interns. She didn't have a paying job for 20 years in London because her parents set her up in her office. But she entered competition after competition after competition, and then she began to crush it. She began to win the competition so much that people said, you know what, I want one of those, and they started to pay her, and then she became incredibly successful. Well, that's sort of encouraging bad behavior, right? That's like me doing a free service for the guy at the school. Because it is hard. It's hard because the commodity has to have meaning to people, or it's not worth anything. And the commodity was worth something because Zaha Hadid could actually spend 20 years entering competitions and showing what she did because they were published competitions, and have a staff of 8 or 10 paid for by her parents to work for her doing things to glorify what she wanted to do and get the work. Well, that's the inverse of the way it actually should work. Because the truth is, it's not architecture justifying architecture or architects designing for other architects. It's people making buildings for our culture. The broadest culture you can possibly think about. Everything from history to faith to weather to idiosyncrasy to humor. All these things should be part of our architecture, but it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to justify not being serious about architects designing for other architects, but for the culture. That was true until I saw the Michelangelo exhibit 2 years ago in New York. And in it they had these parchments. They were so carved. This is animal skin that starts really thin, and you draw on it or wash it or you paint on it. And they showed them from two sides because they were so expensive. They were drawn on and created on two sides. They were phenomenal. They were absolutely beautiful. Well, see, now it's distorted again. But still, he was doing studies of a sculpture, and he was also designing a portico for a piazza. One side sculpture, backside piazza. And what happens is this incredible combination of ideas, and mindsets, and realities is allowed to cross-pollinate. He becomes what we all are. All of you are polymaths. You are polymaths. You think about music, you think about the bird you see, you think about the history that you just read, you see the sunset, you eat some great food. All these things you are doing enrich your life. And so the idea is your buildings can actually take on many different thoughts simultaneously, and not just that one photograph you're designing the entire building to so that you can win an award. They can actually be about all you are, all the client is, all the context is. They don't have to be limited by preconceptions. And I know this is true because 2 weeks ago, I see this article about a thing I'd never heard of before in Mexico. An institute in Mexico decided, it's easy to talk about different types of architecture. We'll just build them. So they built buildings like this, next to buildings like this, next to buildings like this, next to this, next to this, next to this. This is the way creativity happens, not by imitation, but by combination, by openness, by thoughtfulness. And then I said to myself, well, what do I think is beautiful, right? What do I think is beautiful? Well, what I think is beautiful when I think about these things, I think the Vietnam Wall is, the Vietnam Wall in DC is truly beautiful. I said, well, why do I think that's beautiful? Why should I think that's beautiful? Well, this incredible line, axially to this and to the Lincoln Memorial, that's hard-edged, straight-up, modernist, great architecture. then, 21-year-old Maya Lynn, who I met when she was 22, because she was visiting the studio next to ours, thought this should be reflective so the humans can see themselves, and there should be names so the humans see themselves, see the names. So that it's history. It's not just line and axis and black. It's history, it's humans. It's beautiful. Or this, I don't really like hockey very much. But I go to games at the Yale Well, Ingalls Rink, designed by Errol Saarinen in the 50s, because the shape of this, the activity of this, and people looking at people connect athletics, history, aesthetics. They become an independent entity that to me is as beautiful as that rib thickening as it arcs down. It supports more and more weight as it comes down to the ground. And so it thickens and widens. No one else except architects would see that, but I see it. And I listen to this person screaming, and I watch the check over here, and I'm going, I have no idea if that was offsides or not. But I sure do like this. Why do I like this? Well, I think it's because Ruggles says we do both of these things at the same time. It's not top down and it's not bottom up. It is happening at the same time. It's knowing what you think is beautiful, sensing what is beautiful, trying to bring them together and create your beauty, or the beauty of you and your clients, or you and the context. But what is taught, and it has to be, right? We have to learn how to do this stuff before we have any chance to go on to making something beautiful. So in school, you've got to do things like this to get to this. But what ends up happening, that bleeds into our profession. So that in the awards, in the journalism, in the smart people, in the deep state of architecture, modernism is this. That is what happens. So you're taught the Le Savoie in 1929, where basically everything is perfectly diagrammed and interactive. You're taught the brick house by Mies van der Rohe in 1923 that never got built because it's a perfect Mondrian painting that also happens to be architecture. But it's linear, it's thoughtful, it's intellectual. And now, right now, the dean of the Yale Architecture School, I've known for 30 years, Deborah Burke, has a book on houses. And of course, a great press prints it, it's very lovely. And you've got interiors like this. This is purely right lobe. It is absolutely clean, crisp, perfect stuff. Nothing wrong with it. Many people find it beautiful. I find a lot of it beautiful. But it's one way to do something. It's one way to do something. And why does it actually mean something? To me, it's because homes are the one building that every single one of you in this room will have, has had, will make for other people. It is the universal building. It is the one building where pretension means nothing. Everyone knows what their home is. Everyone would love to have somebody who makes homes tell them how to make the best home they can possibly have. We've designed over 400 homes, freestanding, actual places to live in 40 years. So the problem is the way we teach is not the way we live. We have to teach top down, knowledge bleeding into the person. We live bottom up. We live what we have for breakfast, where we want to go, who we're interested in, what thoughts are with us today. The problem is homes are incredibly evocative to everybody besides architects. You recognize that? There you go. In fact, that unfortunately got stretched, but anyway. But that vision of architects doing homes means that we can actually be the butt of jokes. It says Frank Gehry designed it. I don't know what happened here, but Frank Gehry designed it. And the idea is that the architect will subvert natural order for intellectual order. So part of this lecture now is it's focused on, well, this is easy for this jackass to say. What actually, what does it all mean? Well, I'm going to show you some of the stuff we've done and why it means something to me. So 30 years ago, literally this week, 30 years ago, we built this house on this island. And you can see it was a hell of a thing. We actually had to bring helicopters in to erect it. And it took 5 days to assemble it, a year to prepare, to a year to finish. And it was an amazingly great thing. And it actually ended up being fabulous. And better than that was the space looks out fully shaded, and it looks out. It went through 6 or 7 hurricanes, totally intact. Everything is great. And I got to know this family. He's younger than I am now there with his kids. And he's had several strokes, and now he is going to sell it. So it's in my mind today. And I think about this, because this was 1991. And I think about this. This is last August. This is another family, another house we designed. And I think, yeah, the houses are cool, but the people are the houses. The people are the houses. I designed this house for a couple who's going to be childless and lived there for 20 years. They sold it to a newly childless couple. And today, our staff measured this barn somebody else built on this thing so we can renovate it for these people. So it meant something. We designed this house for somebody 12 years ago. We're redesigning the house next door for her sister. And we do 100 projects. We take the undesigned suburbs and we make things like this look like this, where everything is the same and everything is different simultaneously, where an entry can respect the center, at the same time respect the prismatic, even Asian sensibilities of the owner. Or somebody builds a big mansion, and we build a tiny house on the side of it for his sister, the man's sister, and it ends up being something which is both playful and compact and interesting and expressive structurally, just like the McMansion was not. Or last week, when we figured out how to make a very interesting entry to one of these suburban buildings. Or we work with zoning. Architecture school, it's hard to work with anything, but zoning turns things into a crazy thing, where people see this, they say, oh, dude, you designed the Low House by McKinley and White. I said, no, it's not the Low House. But it's a study of solidity and void, and it's got layering, and it's got signets, and it's got space, and you're going, no, this is actually, the zoning code lets us get this fourth floor because we're the height determines the top, and the bottom is an average, and therefore, if we have a void here, we can have 3,000 square feet here, and they can have a 17,000 square foot building. So, in making a 17,000 square foot building, you can still make things that are beautiful and even elusive to things like the Low House. Or this house we're doing right now, this little tiny house where an existing garage, there's one side of it, there's the other, can actually have this put on it, and this side back in here made if we follow 45-degree zoning code. So this crazy architect house is actually just following the zoning code. Or this incredibly cool linear addition, because that's the front yard setback. So the idea that architects say, oh, I tried to do something good, but the money or the zoning code wrecked it, that's just a problem. So the other thing we do is we solve problems. Like, the only thing I'll be known for when I'm dead is that I designed Maurice Sendak's archives. And the only reason they hired me to design Maurice Sendak's archives is that there was a suburban house in Richfield, and it needed to have something added onto it that didn't wreck the house, because that's part of the museum, that's where he lived. And so what ends up happening is I make this mostly buried thing and this path, and the gardens have gone around it, and it's both old and new, because that's the same stone as in the house. And it's got the round shape because his favorite non-Sendak character in the world was Mickey Mouse. And I said to them, would you like to have one of Mickey's ears be your archives? And so now 6 people in the world know that that round thing wasn't a cool silo form, but it was Mickey Mouse's ears because he loved Mickey Mouse. So in all of this, I can tell you're all rapturous. Come on, smile, give me something. When you're with all of this, we are all asked to submit something to AIA competitions, just because that's what you do. So I submitted some things, 2 things, and they are based on the fact that this won the first awards last year. It's by Joe Moore, who was my TA at Yale, by the way, and basically is just a classic, sorry for the slide, but that's as good as I could get. They're just classic cubes of interesting flat roof cube, these things that are really kind of interesting, and they're kind of like puzzles, and believe me, TEA, Job has probably got a 400,000 word essay on why he designed this house. Well, I did this house, which is in California. And you can see it's not really modern, it's not really old, it's just nice materials, and it's got an interesting, something's happening to it, and all the grounds are completely and thoroughly, fully designed, and it really does try very hard to fit with these trees. The fact that this bleeds into the trees, the fact that you go down to this level of a human where the cars come in, and you go up to the level of the trees on the other side, and they have the same crisp edges. The owners had to have green, so I said, if I'm gonna have green, I'm gonna make the green feel like the green. And wanted to have stones, so I made the stone be massive and conical, and I had it reduced so you can actually feel the presence of what a stone is. And that these, late in the project, making these hangers, these things end up making something which is not modern, and it's not old. It's about the owners, who are now dear friends. We ate their samosas last night, because they made them for us and froze them and sent them to us after 14 years of working together. And with an incredibly intricate, very highly architectonic sections, where everything is woven and put together in a way that's intricate and thoughtful and meaningful and detailed, in a way that is not the simple, almost Asian quality of overlapping spaces and transparency of things that are done all the time. So, you know, the interiors are the same. Lots of interesting trim and things going on, different types of lighting, curved lines, a type of column that I just kind of invented, which is sort of a tulipy thing, but it does have antithesis, coming out to another one of those columns over here. Curves are everywhere, because curves are part of what the owners loved. Glass floor that top lights this kitchen, and also is an interesting thing to sort of encounter when you're in the kitchen. And I submitted it, and I said, well, I'll submit another one, which is basically a little house that was untouched. The owner really loved the idea of making a really cool entry. We had a stair that was horrific, so we took all the parts of the stair and remade all of this. They had a beam they really liked, but they had a column that was sitting in the middle of the room here, so we took that column out, put it here, kept the beam there, put 2 pieces of steel around it, and saved every single part of every single thing we were doing in the existing house and completely changed it. The stair was here, and we made a code-compliant, safe stair out of bronze and some other things. So these things are, to me, are innovative and thoughtful and cool, and we will lose. We will lose, because this does not follow the way I'm sure the jurists think that significant architecture is done. It should be from the top down, have actual thought about the empirical quality of a progressive way of thinking. So what remains? What remains to me at 64, thinking about all this, what really remains to me is the spirit. The reason why we do this, everyone, is the spirit of wanting to create and make things. That's why we're here. And to me, that means, and I'm positing it to you, that we know the past, we're living in the present, and we sense the future. Both things are happening simultaneously. There's bandwidth beyond architecture. I looked at people working in an existing existing city, village, place. I talked to people that were dealing with the High Line in different buildings that are all around them now. All those existing contexts, all those parts that are undeniably real, are not the reason why you do this to them. They're the reason why you should think about what did they mean to the people that actually will have to live with them after the architect is dead. So in all of that, why do we think that beauty is somehow a magic word that unlocks this for us? Well, some people that were in Sorrento saw this already, so I apologize, but I thought about this. I was a board member for 12 years of something called the Katharine Hepburn Cultural Arts Center in Old Salem. And I went to see a show that involved the Blind Boys of Alabama and the guy who's walking in Memphis singing together or something like this. And so the end of this show, everybody's screaming at the Blind Boys, it's sing Amazing Grace, sing Amazing Grace, sing Amazing Grace. And, oh, Amazing Grace, what a cool thing. Amazing Grace, written by John Newton in 1779. This tune hymn that everybody knows, Barack Obama sang it a cappella and knocked everybody out. It's one of the great songs in the world. So they and it makes it more interesting is that John Newton actually sailed a ship and it almost sunk, almost killed him, and killed all the slaves he was bringing over from Africa to America. He was a slave ship owner. He almost died in there, and he literally said, God, if you save my life, I know this is truly evil. So he worked as an abolitionist after that and wrote Amazing Grace, one of the great songs ever. And the resonance of 5 elderly black men being asked to sing Amazing Grace was deeply moving to me, except they began to sing it by the tune, The House of the Rising Sun, written by a woman in 1960, sung and made a hit by the Animals in 1964. The people who can sing can listen to that in their heads. And the idea, basically, of them singing a cappella, Amazing Grace, to the actual the line of the House of the Rising Sun, the contrast of the sacred and the profane emanating in this way, was deeply beautiful to me because it was both and. It was both and. Like this interior we did in DC, where the woman had collected artifacts and had lived in a suburban, really very bad house, and we cleaned out all the ceilings, opened things up, added trim, and celebrated all these objects so there could be space, light, history, color, shape. And that led me directly to think about the contrast of the sacred and the profane, the fact that a B-roll in my firm is actually writing about and doing things that involve religion. Well, this is not about religion. This is actually really about the fact that there is something sacred, there is beauty, there is something which is meaningful. So I went to this chapel in 1963. I'm on the board of the Incarnation Camp and Conference Center. They needed a new one, so we made one where we took that shape and we made it the top of this, went from this to this, and made architecture. It's architecture. It won a national award by Faith Informed magazine. It's recognized architecture. It was declared by the AIA in Connecticut the spiritual space in Connecticut. But what it really is this. It's 350 kids singing Lean On Me. That's really what it is. 350 kids aren't worrying about Jesus or some gospel or some guilt manipulating hypocrisy. They're thinking about being together and being in this place. And this is in the green in my hometown. And we did this, and it was, oh, it's cool, it's a new sanctuary. Well, no, it's really not. It's this 1955 sanctuary that actually created a new sanctuary out of it, a direct extension, except different because that's timber frame. And right now we're redesigning the interior of the Episcopal Cathedral in Hartford, Connecticut, where everything back in here, those lines you see back in here, are Ithiel-Town's 1849 ribs in the ceiling, unbelievably beautiful. And we are taking those ribs and making a cage so that we can have lighting and sound equipment and everything that feels like it's actually part of the original aesthetics of the building. So to me, beauty is God's handwriting. It's the undefinable reality that's in every single person that we don't understand because we don't really know where it's coming from. We have no idea why it's there, but it's there. It's undeniable, and it's as undeniable as handwriting. It's actually clear, specific, and real, not feigned, as are mistakes. So this article that I wrote about that house you saw was the fact that I made a huge seminal error in the interior of the building, aesthetically, and I figured out how to change it. And you saw the after photos of that change. It had not been done yet. But the reality is, architects have to understand that if you're thinking of both and, of all things happening simultaneously, there is no right answer and wrong answers. There are right answers and wrong answers at the same time. And you have to sort out what is the right answer for the work you're doing. So I write this piece. 2 years ago, I got called by Christopher Alexander's wife. Christopher Alexander is a writer, I don't know if you know the name, but he wrote Timeless Way of Building, he wrote a pattern language, a bunch of different books. Right now, if you go to Amazon, he is almost every day the #1 seller of books written about architecture in any given day. Even though he's not world famous anymore, people like reading his stuff. So they end up doing something which is, they ask me to come and I teach something called the home course. And a bunch of you have taken the home course, you know about it. And it's very quick and it's international and it shares between all these places, you and Hartford and San Francisco and the Building Beauty program. And by the way, this is picked not by me, so somebody here made this wonderful building. Person in Sorrento made this building. A kid up in Hartford made this building. They're just houses, but they take what you know. No matter how young you are, how uneducated you are, you know about your home. You know what your home is. And I want you, all of you, to be part of the home program this year, because really it's going to be a cyber program. We're not going to go to Sorrento. We're actually going to do this in cyberspace with hopefully scores and scores of kids, not 30 like we had last time. And this is what happens. A girl reads it and she says, I felt for the first time that in Building Beauty was actually made a happy home for myself. So that's why I think we do beauty. It's bandwidth beyond architecture. These are the people we've gotten together. Now, if you have to go, go. But I got an extra 10 minutes where I want to talk a little bit about this. There's a little movie at the end, which I think is pretty great. But if you want to stay, stay. You've been laughing so loud I could barely hear you. But anyway, I'm hoping you're okay. Are you okay? Am I doing okay? Am I all right? You sure? You sure? All right. I never know. You look a little bit dead. But anyway, so amp up the volume. So they came up with 4 things. So take out your pens. Write these 4 things down. This is something that's involved 40 years. This is actually created by a professor in India and vetted by professors in a whole bunch of places. A whole bunch of places. And I then detoxed because the language is pretty terrible. If you ever read Christopher Alexander's books, if you read Christopher Alexander's books, they are right on and they are hard to read. They're phenomenally interesting content, but the actual prose used is brutal. So I hopefully debrutalize this. I'm just going to read you the first part. Now think about this as 4 couplets that link together. And you can read the rest of this later. Self is society. It's not all just about you. It's about where you are and the larger reality of you as part of many people. Action, designing things based on the awareness of that. Based on when you're doing things, you're not just doing it for you. You're doing it for your client, the neighborhood, the culture at large. Maintenance as renewal, meaning it's not just enough to sort of make a one-off. You have to think about, well, what am I changing when I'm making this? Imitation is great, but imitation doesn't actually renew anything. It actually perpetuates what exists. So the idea is it is in your wheelhouse, in your mantle, your obligation to actually renew. And lastly, regeneration with learning. In other words, as you learn, you change, and believe me, I'm 64, I learn something every single day. You change what you do because of what you're learning. You don't say, I have the right way, and that is the highway, correct and wrong. It is the things that are happening together. And when you see this video, which will come out, you can read all this interesting stuff. But the course is taught, it might not be taught this year in Sorrento, we don't have enough students, but we're going to actually be back in the following year, but it's actually going to have parts taught in Sorrento. About half a dozen kids. And it's based on just this, and I will read this to you. This is Christopher Alexander, and he actually sounds not bad. He goes, what would it be like to live in a mental world where one's reasons for making something functionally and one's reasons for something making something in a certain shape or in a certain ornamental way are coming from the exact same place, but precisely the same place in you, precisely the same place. Meaning, not image, not mimicking history, not, oh, I really like wood, but maybe history, wood, and image, all happening at the same time. So what they do is they analyze this courtyard in front of the Santa Ana Institute. They do what's called feeling maps, which are these things where they interview a lot of people and they say what's good, what's bad. They figure out what people love, what people don't love. And they do this kind of interactive thing. And they make solutions and thoughts. So they've got a dozen or 18 projects they'll do over the next decade. And so the first thing they made was a bench. There I am. There's the bench. There are the students. Then last year they made this pergola, this arbor. And they're going to make a bridge. And they've got 3 or 4 other segmented courses that I would love it if the students here could sign up for. And they're trying to make it so that if you wanted to do this, you can do this online and you could just do it. One is an architect out of San Francisco named Chris Andrews. And these are the carpets done for a church in Turkey. Okay? And the problem is the church's carpets are all falling apart for 3 or 4 years. So they take these carpets that are falling apart and they give them to the kids. And the kids look at them with the actual people from the church and Chris Andrews. And they then use computer modeling to sort of figure out not some sort of repetitive, redundant thing, but how did the weaver, who takes a year to make each carpet, how did he think about how he made the carpet? And he analyzed it over a period of a week, and they come up with this, and then they can have a machine make the carpets. Well, to me, I think it's just like Daniel Burnham's plan of Chicago. There's no difference. It's organizing, lining things up. What is priority? What is incidental? What is planned? What is perimeter? What is pattern and core? All these essential architectural elements are made real in a carpet or a tile. And in this great student from India, another great student from India, just talked about the fact that it essentially, I refuse to be killed by architectural cynicism. Instead of thinking about the fact that you're not that bright kid, you just can't be me Sandro, you're thinking about who are you and what do you want. The last thing I'm going to show you, and please, Jesus, I hope this works, is they actually throw pots. Well, that's fine. Throw a pot. That's good. The pots are good. So they end up making pots. But after they make pots, they bring in a sculptor. And they're asked in making the sculpture, they are asked to essentially recreate their pots in stone.
Chi vede è abituato a guardare l'insieme e poi dopo si sofferma nei dettagli. Chi non vede riconosce l'insieme partendo dai dettagli, quindi per uno scultore non vedente il dettaglio è indispensabile proprio per riconoscere l'insieme di quello su cui lavora.
I didn't know what to expect, but it's unfolding and it's easier than what I thought. It's very enjoyable. It makes me really happy to be touching the material and to feel it. And it helps you see the object if you close your eyes and feel with your hands rather than with your eyes.
A questo punto facciamo più attenzione al tatto, perché la vista non l'avete.
The difference mainly is that before you perceive volume, now you feel the volume of this thing. So the blindfold sort of, you stop thinking through your eyes and start looking at the feeling of this, the curvature. You notice that more now. This morning, actually, the emotion previously it felt easy or something separate from more outside than you. And now, especially with this fold, it feels more within.
Yeah, it's really great program. I mean, it's like my dream program.
I can.
So I wanted you to see that because I wanted you to see there are many, 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 many ways to learn architecture. This is a great way. This is the way it should happen. But there are more ways you can also learn architecture. I want you to think about that because you've got the rest of your lives to think about what do you value and how will you make what you value. Thank you. And in 1 hour. 1 hour. If any questions or anything you want to talk to me after, I'm here for you guys, whatever you want.
Who's going to be the first one to ask the question? Always a tough one.
Yes, ma'am. There's a connector to the house that actually is a security place because it's super secret tough. But yes, there's a connector that's subordinate, and that projects out. We renovated one way to be the archives, and it's half underneath the ground. It's yes. In my opinion, it's fear. Okay, loss of control. I literally went to this lecture in D.C. and they said this is an anti-modernist. And this is a modern architect. And they paired me with another architect who's my friend as a true classicist, and there's going to be a debate. And we've known each other. There was no debate. It's all just architecture. The people that are so upset with modernism see the loss of the past and see it being replaced by the hegemony of ideas and intellect over humanity and culture. And on one level, that's correct. But on another level, if you design a direct copy of Penn Station, what's changing in the world? The idea of both and, the fact that they've totally freaked out when I showed some modernist buildings, and there are people that think those are the most beautiful things in the world, completely and totally, and I think that's wonderful. And I like modernist buildings too. And I love classical buildings too. They were actually like losing it. I was berated in a bunch of blogs because the audience began to nod their heads and go like, yeah, what's the problem? But it's become political now. So in England especially, there's a thing called Create Streets. It has hundreds of thousands of hate things going on between the Create Streets people and the modern architects. And it's bad. And it's probably going to get worse. I need more. Yes?
I know you always said that you were always saying that whenever you made like these changes, even though the building was like, you didn't exactly change the entire building, but you just took what you saw and made something new out of it. I know you always said that every time you enter it would win. But is winning really like being gold?
Here's the problem. We all are who we are. I was captain of my high school football team. So one of my major character flaws is, and this is not a joke by the way, it's a flaw, every new building I see being built, I curse myself that I was not the architect. I mean, that is shallow, so shallow I'm 3 grades below the ground right now. I mean, and that's part of me. I want to do things. And so if you know that, it's not as bad. but at the same time, it's bad. And I think all of us have that in ourselves, right? But at the same time, if you know that you're destined to make failures, but you are not a failure, you are not a failure, but you make failures, you can do some pretty great stuff. You can do some pretty great stuff. If you think you're a failure because somebody made the cornice wrong, you're going to have an unhappy life. You're going to have an unhappy life. So part of this is trying to figure out, since there's no work at Skid Rowings in Merrill for 40 years and, you know, retire to Florida, which was our generation, parents' generation, since it's all going to be more of a gig thing and more kind of an evolutionary thing with all of you adapting to these new things, keep your eyes on the prize, man. Keep your eyes on the prize. See, what do I care about? How am I going to make what I care about? And that means you got to get in here as well as in here. Both. You're almost raising your hand. You almost raised your hand. All right, thank you guys. Thank you very much. Thank you.